but this afternoon. The first thing I need somebody to help me out with something. So can I get a volunteer? Something real simple, it's just a favor. Okay, what is your name?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth? Elizabeth, what I want to do is at the end of my talk, the last thing I want to say is the number one thing I've learned. Okay, and if I forget to do that, I don't want to be driving away and go, oh, shoot. So if you could just point that out, if you could just say, what's the last thing, or, you know what I mean? So,
Okay. Cool.
thank you very much. Okay, so I want to point out first that I am not an expert in this field, okay? It's a neurological disease, and there's a lot about it that I can't explain, okay? I'm going to put it in my own words. So like when I wrote a blog several like a year ago, I put it in a way that I could understand. So I want you to know that I'm not dumbing it down. I'm not saying it simply so that you guys will understand it. I'm doing it because that's the way I understand it, okay? So with that being said, and then the second thing before I start is I'd like to point out that this is a common good, and I would like you guys to feel free at any point if there's something I don't understand, or I mean something you don't understand. I hope I understand. If there's something you don't understand, if there's something that you would like me to expand upon. If my speech becomes not very clear, because that's one of the problems, then feel free to interrupt, to ask me that, and I'll expand on that. All I ask is that you pass up like $20, and when I get your money and get it in my pocket, then I'll answer your question. Not really, $10. So the first thing I like to do is, my condition is called spinocerebellar ataxia. Okay, spinocerebellar refers to two different things. It refers to the spinal cord and the cerebellum, but it's all put into one word. The second word is ataxia. Okay, so I'd like to break those down for you. The first word I'd like to take and look at is ataxia. Okay, so there are many. First of all, let me ask, is anybody familiar with that term, ataxia? What kind of, you've heard of it referred, what do you have an idea of what it may be?
Well, difficulty verbalizing thoughts and
That's certainly part of it, yeah. So ataxia is just simply an uncoordination, a problem with fine motor skills, okay? One definition I looked up said it's a state of chaos. You could say that, and it certainly gets to that point sometimes, but the point is that there is a bunch of different kinds of ataxia, and some of them are permanent and some aren't. And there are some forms of ataxia that you may not even think about. Like when you are under the influence of alcohol, you can be said to have ataxia, because what alcohol does is directly put your cerebellum under the influence, and it's temporary because that'll wear off. But while you're under the influence, you have problems with all sorts of motor skills. Your speech is slurred, your gait is exaggerated. The second kind of ataxia that I'm going to give you as an example is one that every one of you in this room have had, believe it or not. And that is that I have recently learned within the last several weeks, talking to a neurologist, that when we are a child and we're developing, we're first learning how to walk and we're unsteady, first learning to feed ourselves, we're getting food all over the place. It's said that it can be said that we have a form of ataxia. But it's temporary because those muscles do develop. We do learn how to stand, how to walk, balance, all that stuff. So what I'm talking about is a form of ataxia that is degenerating. It's not getting better like it does when you're a child under normal circumstances. It's just getting worse and worse as we go. Okay, and I'll touch on that in a minute. The other form of ataxia, which may or may not be permanent, or temporary is called acquired ataxia. And acquired ataxia could come to you through all sorts of different forms. It can be a stroke, it can be a disease that you acquire, it can be a vitamin deficiency that you acquire, and it may, like I say, it may or may not be permanent. So like if it's a vitamin deficiency, let's say you lack something, well, then the doctor is gonna help you balance out your physical, and that may take care of your ataxia-like symptoms, okay? There is another form of ataxia that I want to point out. It's called sporadic ataxia. And it may or may not be genetic. It may just come out of the blue for no reason. They don't know how to explain it. But what it means is that you're hit with it all of a sudden, and you may go 24 hours with not being able to write, not being able to communicate, and they don't know why. It's unknown. And so my SCA is an unknown variety. And there is 40 to, depending on what source you look at, like I belong to a National Ataxia Society, and they, in a publication they put out last summer, said there's 40. The neurologist I just talked to said there's as many as 60. So somewhere between the two, there's 40 to 60. And there may be more than that. The only distinguishing factor between the numbers is a gene that may or may not be missing or mutated. And so there may be things about mine as an unknown SCA that they discover in the next few years. So I may have SCA 117. I just don't know it right now. Okay? So let's take the first word that comes before ataxia. Spinocerebellar. Take the second part of that word, the cerebellar. It stands for cerebellum. So can anybody in here tell me what the cerebellum does? Do you know? Have you heard that term?
Is it like fine motor skills?
Exactly. Exactly. It is, ataxia is a, I just lost the word. It's a degenerate, but it's a word for, all I can think of is Italian word, and that's not correct. I'll think of it a little bit. But it's a word for little brain. That's what it means. Cerebellum means little brain. So you have the main brain, and this is where my descriptive definition is going to come in, because I refer to the main brain as the head office. Basically, all executive decisions come from the head office, right? Well, then they get sent immediately to the small office underneath the brain called the cerebellum. The job of the cerebellum is hooked to the spinal column, which where all the nerves run. Its job is to send the signals, to interpret what the main office wants, and send those signals out to the areas that are being signaled, correct? Well, in my little office, the guy that runs the room stops showing up for work, and when he does, about 60% of the time he's hungover, and he's been drinking on the job. And in that room, there's little buttons and levers and monitors, so he can see what's going on in the rest of the body, and he can pull levers and push buttons for pertaining areas, right? Well, since he hasn't been to work, about 60% of those monitors have burned out. Some of the levers have rusted shut. Some of the buttons don't work, and there's no IT department to come along and fix that. So that's where I'm at now. Okay. So that's the cerebellum. And so then what I refer to is that the first part of the word is spinal, which means spinal. So together the brain and the spinal column make up the central nervous system. So my disease is mostly a nervous disease that the nerves are not getting the correct, they're either not getting the correct signal, or the guy's not at work and not even sending the signal out. So therefore, everything I do is exaggerated. okay? So, from walking to speaking to swallowing without choking to signing my own name, I gotta tell you, half the time I write stuff, I'll come back to it later and I can't even read it, what I wrote. So, so it affects everything that I do. And it came to me when I was 38 years old. And I've had it now for 13 years, correct? Just quick math. I'm 51 minus 13, yeah, 13 years. So it was one of those things where I'm sitting first of all, I went to my family doctor because just out of the blue, I started having spatial issues. I was mostly for what I remember is I kept banging my shoulder every time I tried to go through a door. I just couldn't line myself up correctly. So the first thing, your mind just doesn't go to handicap, to permanent handicap. You just don't think about that. So the first thing I thought of was, it's an inner ear problem. It's like some kind of infection maybe. I'll go to the doctor, he'll put me on a course of antibiotics, things will be great. So I went to the doctor and he had me do some basic balance things like the police officer would do if he pulled you over for suspected DUI. He had me walk the line, try to stand still without my eyes closed. I'm not going to demonstrate those things for you because I can't do it. So he sent me to a neurologist. He was smart enough to figure out right away that there was a problem. He didn't expand. He didn't tell me what might be going on. He just sent me to a neurologist. So was still thinking, everything's fine. This is going to get taken care of. Well, the neurologist put me through a series of tests. He gave me an MRI. I still was not concerned. At some point I was going to wake up and drink the coffee, but at this point I was not concerned. He suspected exactly what was going on, but he didn't share it with me. He sent me to another neurologist up at OSU just to confirm. And that neurologist was the one that gave me the diagnosis. And I tell you, when he walked into the room and told me, I'd never heard of cerebellar ataxia before. That's what he called it. It wasn't spinal cerebral, it was just cerebellar ataxia. I'd never heard of that before. His diagnosis was that in 5 to 10 years, I would be most probably I'd be in a wheelchair. And I took that as gospel because he was the expert, right? And I had no idea what I had. So I went through a state of deniability because it was just too fantastic of a thought to get your mind around. And I remember going from that to being, there's a whole mix of emotions that you go through when something like that happens. I remember going through anger, frustration, denial, sadness, the whole thing, the whole gamut. And eventually I came to a point where I just had to accept this is the way it is. There is no cure for this disability. This is the way it is, right? And so many of you sitting there, I remember my college years, and I remember not having too many cares in the world, right? And something like this was just completely beyond my scope of reality. But I would like to encourage you all that no matter what life brings you in the future, that I had to accept my disease. And one of the ways I deal with my disease is I see it as a separate entity to who I really am. Does that make sense to everybody? So my disease, in fact, the name of my blog is My Life, A Journey with a Taxi Along for the Ride. And the reason why I did that is because that's the way I feel. I feel like a taxi is always that annoying friend that always wants to ride somewhere, always, always there. I can't get rid of him, but I just have to tailor my life around the fact that he's always going to be there. Okay, so I remember what I wanted to say.
Okay, good.
One of the last things, but thank you for wanting to do that. One of the last things that I want to say is that I came to the place, and this is what I wanted to convey to everybody, and this is what I'd like you to take away and remember, that no matter what the handicap is, no matter what the disability is in life, mine is SCA, you have to, and I had to come to this place, you have to remember that it will not change who I am here, and it will not change who I am here. It does not change the ability I have to have compassion on people, the ability I have to love people, the ability I have to be creative. And a lot of people get to that point and they think my disability is who I am, and it changes everything about them. And that's really what I wanted to say, is that it doesn't have to. You have to give it permission to do that. I can't control the fact that I can't go up and down the stairs without thinking about it like everybody else can. I can't control the fact that I don't have to think about every bite I take and swallow, but I can control who I am. I don't have to let that influence what I do. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So that was just a real brief overview of my condition. And I took freshman biology in 79, so before you try to add that up, you're at 51. But I did not take anatomy in college, anything like that, so I'm not an expert on how all that works. All I know is how it affects me, and so that's really what I wanted to say. And I'd like to ask you guys if you have any questions. I'm an open book. I'm not very easily offended. I'm thinking that there's probably nothing you guys can say that's gonna bother me. So if there's anything you want to know, just feel free to ask. Yeah.
How bad would you say your fall risk is?
My fall risk is pretty, I would say out of 1 to 10, it's probably about an 8 or 9. It's pretty extreme. Depending on what I'm doing, I have to make sure, like I've got three steps coming out of my carport. And we didn't design that very well when we had the house built, but I've got a railing right there, and I have to make sure I'm holding on to that railing because I have fallen off that quite a few times. And I have to say that my wife Melissa, that's one of her concerns, is that she'll be at work and I'm home by myself and something like that will happen, so I try to be extremely careful during the day. I have to pay attention to fatigue. That's the biggest issue. I have to take things in sections, and each day I plan my day. I do work around the house, so I plan about, this is going to take me about an hour. So whether it's laundry or mopping or waxing the floor or vacuuming, whatever the case is, and then I have to take a break, and I have to be okay with that. I'll sit down and I'll either write, or I'll correspond with other people. I belong to about 25 social groups on Facebook that all have to do with taxi, and people are always asking me questions. So I'll either correspond, or I'll write, or I'll do a little reading, or whatever the case may be, but I have to do that because fatigue is one of the worst. You know, I worked full-time as a janitor at a small school district up until 2012. And at that point, they reevaluated and said that, you just can't do this anymore. And what was happening was I'd come home from work and it was like I was extremely, extremely drunk. I'd bounce off walls. I couldn't get out of chairs without falling over. And the doctor that evaluated me asked me, that was his first question. He said, "How do you feel after you've worked an 8-hour day?" And I told him, I said, "Man, I'm fatigued. I can't, everything is extreme. I can't do it." And he said, "Well, that's because your muscles are working 2 to 3 times harder during the day just to keep you upright. And when you get home at night, they're just like, we're done. That's it." So I haven't worked since 2012. So does that answer that question? Okay. Probably more than you wanted it to, huh? Yes.
What was it when you went and got the MRIs, or when they looked at your brain? What was it that they saw that indicated that it was ataxia?
Okay. They look at the cerebellum, and it should be full of gray matter. Okay. Mine looked like, well, about half of it was gone. There's a big area of just dark matter, and the rest of it looked like Swiss cheese, just a bunch of holes and patterns in it and stuff. That was the indicator for them. Yes.
You said when you got your first diagnosis, that the doctor said you would be in a wheelchair, and you just kind of took that as like the truth, but you're not in a wheelchair.
No,
so,
I'm not.
Was he wrong, or are you going to eventually have to?
Well, that's a good question. There are different degrees. He was wrong, by the way. It's been 13 years and I'm still walking. Just, I wouldn't say fine, but I'm still walking. There are different degrees, and mine is what has come to known as a slow progressing. So all the cerebellum ataxias are progressive, and they're degenerative. So there may come a day, but like I was telling your instructor there before class, is that I lead 2 support groups, and I have people in the group that have a diagnosis of like maybe 2 to 3 years old, and they're already far advanced, way advanced. I thought I was bad. When I walked into the first support group 3 years ago, I was ashamed. I thought, oh my word, I shouldn't even be here. Look at these people. And so it's different degrees. He was wrong in the 5 to 10 years because he bases that on statistics, but there may come a day where that'll be true. So, yeah.
So I am a grad student here, and I have a son who has a neuromuscular disorder.
Okay.
So he's used a wheelchair since he was 20 months old. So I'm curious though, since you don't use a wheelchair yet, how that will feel for you. At what point you would decide that it is more advantageous to you? And if you said that you see the disease as separate to your identity, and do you think that moving to wheelchair mobility would change that for you?
It's a good question. Good question. Because I did struggle. I'll give you there are stages that I've progressed, and I've gotten to the place where getting up at nighttime to go check the bathroom, make sure everything's okay, right? Got to the place where she was afraid I was gonna fall because I just have no ability in the middle of the nighttime. So I started using a walker at night, and I have to use a walk. And if I'm sick and my system is stressed, fatigued, then balance just goes out the wall, out the door. So I have to use a walker. Well, to get to that place was kind of a milestone for me. And so when I get to a wheelchair, I'm certainly gonna have to deal with that issue. And I am pretty convinced, very convinced, by the way, that what I said is true, that I cannot let it change who I am. But I'm not gonna tell you that there might not be some struggle and frustration at that point. Did that answer your question? Thank you. Yes?
So you started going to your support group 3 years ago? So
Ye-
what made you like start going? Because you went, like 10 years without it, so.
Yeah, well, like I had said, I worked full-time, and I just didn't have a lot of time, and it was a taxi, cerebral taxi was kind of in the back of my mind, literally, and that's what, but it was in the back of my mind. I wasn't focused on that, but when that milestone of losing my job happened, I was like, okay, I gotta do other stuff. I can't just sit here, right? So, for example, I started volunteering at a local hospice group because that's something I could do, right? Visit with people. So, at that point, I reached out and discovered there is a support group in Oregon that I can go to, be part of. So that's why I started going through.
And has that been helpful for you, with like adjusting to different transitions and stuff, like having to use like the walker at night and everything? Like has the support group helped you kind of deal with that, to be able to reach out to other people?
Yeah, I would say it has, and that's the biggest thing about support groups is everybody has some of the same frustrations and are at different places in their life, and I can watch other people that may be in a wheelchair or using a walker, a rollator, which is a walker with wheels, right? I can look at them and see how they deal with it, and it encourages me that, just because I might get to that stage does not mean things are over for me. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, it does, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. Anyone else? Yes.
Another question. What would you say is, like, your biggest obstacles physically and socially with your disease?
Well, first let me touch on socially, because it was a point that I wanted to speak about that I had forgotten, so thank you for reminding me. You're good. I think the biggest challenge socially, and you just hear this from all sorts of people. One lady on Facebook that I met a year ago has a 11-year-old son that was born with this, right? And has a walking exaggerated. And time after time after time, people accuse him of drinking. And that's the biggest issue that we face in the community, is that people that don't understand just assume that it's alcohol related. People get blamed all the time for that, and it's very frustrating. In fact, one of the support groups online that I belong to is called "I Have a Taxi, I'm Not Drunk." So, and what was the second part of that question?
Like physically, or like, I don't even know, like, is, like, outside world, like, is it hard to get around the way you
Yeah.
have things set up and that kind
It
of
is,
stuff?
it
So-
is. And you don't notice it until it becomes a struggle for you, but people do not pay attention. And it becomes very, very hard to move in any kind of a crowded situation. Narrow aisles, whenever I get to any kind of event, concert, sporting event, whatever, I try to take the easiest seat I can, the bottom of the bleachers, the outside seat, because I can't walk across people. And so I would say that that's probably the biggest challenge, is that people just don't pay attention. Luckily, I have a real good support system and that watches out for me and makes sure that aisles are clear, and I can do that. I'm sure you got a question.
You said you stopped working in 2012. and due to your condition, just financially, economically, how has your condition looked? Kind of how has it affected you as far as you're not working anywhere else?
Mhm.
What have you had any struggles or any issues with the financial aspect?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, I'd say the first struggle was when I learned that disability was gonna pay me about 2/3 of what I had been currently making, because I thought, I didn't ask for my disease. Do you think I enjoy it? You know, so, what has happened with my financial setup is that luckily I started working at the school district, about 5 years before I was let go, and luckily enough, they supplied long-term disability, because that wasn't even in my mind. So I had that, and that started paying me 3 months after the fact. And if it wouldn't have been for that, I would have gotten nothing, because it took Social Security about 2.5 years of feet dragging to finally decide to pay me. And if they wouldn't have, I would have gone that whole time without anything. And that would have been a hardship. Now, because I collected disability, when Social Security did decide to pay me, they had to back pay me from when I should have been eligible, which was like not long after I left work. So I got 2.5 year check from them, right? So but I had to turn right around and pay it all back. Because if I wouldn't have, it would have been like I'd been double dipping, because I was getting disability that whole time. So the way it is now is that disability pays me about, I still get the exact same wage, 2/3 of my income. But disability pays me about 1/3 of that, and then Social Security pays the rest. So, it's a good question.
If you wanted to work, are there many job options for you, like as far as, that will, like jobs that will be willing to accept you with your disease? Or?
You know, that's the struggle, and not that I found, because just about every job has one or two requirements that I'm not gonna be able to fill. And so then it becomes, yeah, I haven't found it yet. I would gladly do it, but I haven't found it yet. So. Anyone else? Yeah. Wow, I guess so, you came prepared.
You said that the ataxia is kind of like, it's degenerating, right?
Uh-huh.
So